Good morning and welcome to the daily cyber briefing for Friday the 16th of May. I'm Stephen Neutron. The Fileless Remcos RAT Attack is something that popped up this morning to me. It's just as a reminder that things like PowerShell are still being used to avoid detection via traditional AV type solutions. So there's a good article in HackRead this morning that talks about this. Basically, these sorts of attacks rely on the fact that, yes, okay, you've got to get somebody to click on something. Once they've clicked on it, PowerShell can be used to change settings in various pieces of tooling. This particular case, which I think makes a very interesting example, user receives a zip file, opens zip file, there's a shortcut link, an LNK file, runs the LNK file then calls MSHTA, runs MSHTA to call VB script to download an HTA file under the guise of a decoy PDF, deobfuscated and then loaded into memory. So once in memory, of course, Remcos will then do all the things you would expect, but there's no trace left of the Remcos part of it on the disks. It runs purely in memory. Now, in order to avoid detection, the script is also doing things like changing Windows Defender settings to exclude C users public, for example. Having got to the point where you have got a script running on a machine, if you can use something like PowerShell VB script, whatever it may be, to make changes to things, and if your system is set up in such a way that normal users are able to make changes to antivirus exclusions, for example, which is kind of it's a very common default position to be in, because the majority of majority, good question, I'm not sure, but a fair percentage of systems don't have an administrator that is a separate actual human from the person sat in front of the computer. So it is relatively easy to get a user to do things at a system level that you really wouldn't necessarily want them to do. So yeah, it makes for interesting reading, and I think it shows again the importance. One of the things that we've spoken about a lot over the last, in fact, as long as we've been running this briefing, is that there are three domains of visibility that you need in order to actually understand what's going on. You need to know what's flowing across your network, so what's actually talking to what and what are they saying. You need information from security logs in their broadest sense, server logs, cloud logs, whatever it may be. But you also need to have a pretty good understanding about what's running on endpoints, and not just what programs are installed, but actually what processes are running and what those processes are actually doing. And then the way in which you would spot this sort of stuff is by having that level of visibility. So it may well be that your antivirus software won't spot this happening, but if you've got process level visibility of what's going on endpoints, it gives you a fighting chance of spotting what's happening. And of course, once you've detected things, contain, eradicate, recover, the core part of a incident response process. Okay, on to other things. I've noticed I've noticed probably more over the last few weeks, possibly a little longer, I'm not totally sure, that when I'm searching for things, when I'm searching for things, information, research, whatever it is, need to do. I do a fair amount of that. It's part, and anybody else listening to this that is working in the cyber industry will undoubtedly spend a fair proportion of their day checking stuff out and looking things up on probably Google, because we kind of all use Google. I had noticed that Reddit forums have not completely disappeared, but they've significantly dropped out of the search results. Didn't really think much of it. I'm not a heavy Reddit user. I dip in when there's information there that I think is useful. I don't spend my time on Reddit. Well, it turns out that Google has had a change in its algorithms based around what it describes as a focus on expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness, which has downgraded Reddit results, because Reddit results are community based, therefore considered to be low authority, community driven content that doesn't meet these new quality thresholds. So just be aware, if, like me, you find a whole load of very useful stuff in Reddit and other community-based platforms, Google is currently downgrading this stuff so that you are much more likely to get what they consider authoritative, which basically means whatever big corp wants you to think rather than necessarily what's actually going on. So thought I'd bring that to your attention, because if you're not getting the results that you expected, from the sense of being able to use Google's search engine to get the view from, on the ground kind of view, rather than the sanitized corporate view. That's one of the things that's going on at the moment. They are downgrading this sort of stuff. So just potentially consider, if you're not able to find that kind of useful groundswell of community information via Google searches at the moment, just try a different search engine. As I'm sure all of you are aware, there is an absolutely enormous difference between what's known and what is being done within the cyber community, and what is being, what's presented out at a sort of corporate level. If you look at the quality of information that you get from going to cyber meetups compared to going to InfoSec, or even Black Hat. DEF CON's kind of still community-ish, I guess, but RSA, whatever it might be. Well, quite frankly, I would much prefer to go to a bunch of small meetups than I would spend my time going to the big conferences, because I really don't want to know what big corporate cyber is trying to push down my throat at the moment. I'm much more interested in what's actually going on and the people that actually know how to deal with it. Okay, so moving on to other interesting things. Unfortunately, the article I found this from is behind a paywall, so I'm really sorry, but you'll be able to see the headlines. Undoubtedly, this will move out of mainstream press and mainstream paywall press and into cyber news fairly soon. But the Chinese have now been seen to have installed kill switches into US solar farms, by which we mean literally a kill switch. So there are things called power inverters, which kind of sit in between the solar panels themselves and the grid. And as we've seen with the Iberian Peninsula total power outage a couple of weeks ago, managing a power grid is much more complicated than most of us think. Most of us think, well, okay, you plug into a wall socket, flick the switch, and there is power. In the background, there is a great deal of tech and some very clever people that are balancing the amount of electricity generated with the amount of electricity required, because electricity is moving energy around us. We're in the realms of like taking energy from one form and creating it into another form, as in there is energy used in order to generate electricity at one end. Well, that needs to be balanced with me turning on a kettle or whatever it might be at this end. If there's too much generation, where does that energy go? Well, it trips things, burns things out, blows things up, that kind of stuff. If there's not enough, then of course, your kettle won't boil, kind of thing. So there's a great deal of protection and between the things that generate electricity and the grid, and then the things that use electricity at the other end. So, excuse me. The power inverters, about half the world's power inverters are manufactured in China. Research into these devices has discovered that some, we don't know quite how widespread this is yet, but definitely more than a trivial amount of power inverters have got devices built into them which would allow, presumably, Chinese or Chinese-directed entities to switch them off. Now, as causing disruption is one of the apparent main aims of the PLA Chinese government, in the sense of gaining leverage over or effectively taking over parts of the world from the West. This stuff is very worrying. We've seen that. So solar power, in fact, all renewables are very unreliable in comparison to traditional fossil fuel. Or the thing we should have done, of course, in my opinion, is we should have just gone hell for leather for nuclear. I think the anti-nuclear lot of my generation have got a lot to answer for the mess that we're currently in. However, if you can mess with the power generation from solar panels, you can create spikes and troughs and things that will trip all sorts of stuff going around. So this is very interesting. I know it's geopolitical. If you are working in the industry, or if you have got a solar farm and you're whatever it might be, it is worth having to think about this stuff. It is worth doing some investigation into whether you may inadvertently have been swept up in this, and your devices are capable of being compromised by foreign national governments. Otherwise, it is just something I think we all need to be more generally aware of when we're having discussions around things like how do we maintain a high energy use society in the UK. And then finally from me today, another one which has been on my sort of watch list for a little while. Meta has now decided that it is going to train AI on EU data from May the 27th without making any changes to its consent policies. An Irish entity called a non-profit. No, it's not Irish, actually. Sorry, it's Austrian. Apologies. None of your business. NOYB. They have sent Meta's Irish headquarters a cease and desist letter. Meta is saying, quite frankly, see you in court. Meta has argued in the past that requiring explicit consent is not um, a it's not a legal requirement. They consider that training AI on publicly available data is legitimate interest, especially in Europe, where they want to be able to train AI on different languages and different cultures and different cultural models and these sorts of things. It is going to be very interesting. I'm fairly certain that the EU will come down on the side of NOYB. Whether Meta cares, who knows? Once they've got the data, of course, they've got the data. It is arguably, though, if the data is publicly available, um, it's publicly available. If you make a post or whatever it is publicly available on Facebook, it's actually wrong with the fact that organisations can see this stuff as well as your friends. If you just wanted to restrict it to your friends, restrict it to your friends, that kind of thing. So just be aware there is going to be a right royal bun fight over this one, I'm sure, over the next few months. Sorry, that's hay fever gave me. So there's going to be a fight over this one, I'm totally sure. If, however, you've got data which Meta might be interested in using to train AI, but you don't want that to happen, there are opt-outs for this stuff. Make sure that you've risk assessed this yourself and that you are happy that the data that is going to be used is data that you would allow them to use. Okay, that's all from me for today. Hope you have a good Friday. Hope you have